Hello everybody, and welcome back to the podcast. You're listening to Be Candid with me, your host Amber. I have literally just decided to film this podcast episode right now because for the first time ever, I want to say, I'm home alone. Which, if you've listened to the podcast before, you'll know that in previous episodes you might have heard some talking in the background, some fire alarms, some typing of sorts, because I live with my boyfriend in a very small house in London, in Brixton, and we have no doors in our house, which means even though I'm upstairs in my cozy bedroom recording a podcast episode, he is downstairs gaming, making lunch, doing all the day-to-day things, and you guys get to hear all of it. So I thought, instead of watching American Idol, which by the way is great, I would jump on here and record a podcast episode for you, because I tend to try and schedule it in during my lunch, but I think this is going to be a really fun episode to record for you, and hopefully a really useful episode. So I did want to just dedicate some more time to it, especially because I've potentially got the next couple of hours to just sit and chat, which usually I don't have that much freedom with my time. So I'm happy to be here spending it with you. Just to set the scene for you a little, it's currently Saturday. It's about very close to 5 o'clock. I'm sat in my bed, which again I never do for some reason. I always record my podcasts on the floor, but I'm sat in my bed, we're getting cozy, and not much has happened today. It's kind of been raining. I took some very cute Instagram photos. You can follow me on at ambergtaylor, or the podcast Instagram is at To Be Candid Podcast if you're interested to see those. But other than that, it's been a very chill one. Like I said, I was just watching some American Idol, doing some crocheting, but today we are here to talk about getting rid of toxic friendships and identifying toxic friendships, and just that whole kind of situation, which I think is quite a new thing. Not saying it's groundbreaking and I just came up with it or anything, but I feel like when I was growing up, as a kid or as a teenager, toxic friendships weren't ever discussed. If you had friends, it was a good thing, and friends were nice to you, and if a friend wasn't nice to you, it's just because they weren't supposed to be your friend. It was never that person is toxic. I don't know if that terminology is just pretty recent, but I feel like recently it's been a bit more heavily discussed, and it's something I've personally experienced, and so I just wanted to kind of air it with you guys, chat through it. Like I say all the time, this podcast is all about talking about, those things that people say we're supposed to have figured out by now in your 20s or whatever, and we just don't. We're all figuring it out, and friendships is one of those things that people just assume is going to be so easy and run so smoothly, but unfortunately that's not always the case, and sometimes you do come along those friendships which can be toxic, and it's quite hard to identify those and admit that to yourself, and then also figure out what to do next. So I'm going to chat through that with you today. Before we get started, I just want to give you a definition of what a toxic friendship was, in case you just weren't aware or didn't have a sound understanding, or maybe this is the first time you've heard about toxic friendships, because I definitely never knew, as a young teen or anything like that. I had no clue. But Healthline actually defines toxic friendships as saying, in a toxic friendship, you never feel that support or compassion. You feel I can never say that word. You feel minimized when they brush off your problems, or ignored outright if they never respond to your messages or requests for help. In short, they aren't there for you when you need a friend most. Now, I thought that was really interesting, just because it's so opposite of what a friend is supposed to be. When I think of a friend, my own personal definition would be someone who loves me, potentially unconditionally, hopefully unconditionally, who supports me, who encourages me, who is loyal, and who is reliable. And from that definition from Healthline, you can just see a toxic friend is the opposite of that. They don't support you, they make you feel small, they brush aside your problems, and they just may not respond or not care for you in the way that you expect. Now, obviously, everyone is different. People are going to treat people differently. People are going to think of friendships in different ways. People are going to have higher expectations than others of what's supposed to come from a friendship. And that's fine. That's only natural. It's part of life. Everyone is different. But it's when those different expectations end up hurting you or someone else where it becomes a problem, especially when it's done in like a super manipulative way, which I think is kind of the worst thing, when the friend who's being the toxic part in the relationship kind of knows that they're screwing the other person over, but it's to their benefit, so they don't really care, and they'll happily keep doing it. I think that is the worst, and I think that takes a really strong person to be able to identify that and stand up for yourself, because you really have to push against that kind of force and just know your self-worth in that situation, which no one can teach you. I have tried so hard for so many of my friends. I love them dearly. I pride myself on being like a very loyal and like encouraging friend, or at least I like to think I am. But some of my friends, like, I think they are like God's gift on earth, like absolute angels, but they just don't see themselves that way, and that can be so frustrating. So I've had to learn the hard way, like, you can't tell anyone how much they're worth. Like, I can't sit here and tell you guys listening that you are amazing and the most incredible people, because unless you think of it for yourself, you won't believe it, which, as frustrating as that can be for an outsider, it also makes identifying those toxic friendships and getting rid of them that much harder. So I think to start off, we'll get into my stuff later. To start off, I want to give you some helpful tips. So I've done some research on this topic as well as just from my own personal experience, but I thought I'd just run through the ways that you can identify a toxic friendship, because I thought that might be really useful for some of you if maybe you have someone in mind who what I've been talking about has brought someone to your mind or made you think of someone. Potentially these things might match up and you might begin to identify them as a toxic friend and maybe try and decide what you want to do about that. But these are also just really useful things to know, either for future friendships or friendships you currently have, just to identify like toxic habits in your relationship, I guess. So the first one is that you leave the friend after hanging out feeling worse than when you arrived. I think this is one of the worst feelings and also one of the easiest way to identify if a friendship isn't working out for you. So if you're going to hang out, you're going out for drinks, you're going for a picnic or like a walk down the river, whatever it might be, and you go there feeling pretty good, like it's just your average day, you feel pretty good about yourself, you like your outfit, nothing bad's going on, it's a sunny day, you know? You get there, you hang out with your friend for like an hour or two, and then you leave feeling deflated, small, insignificant, or a bit upset, or feeling a bit crap about yourself, or you have low self-esteem. You really need to recognise that emotion and figure out why. Is it because of something you've talked about which has stirred up emotions in you? Or is it just because of the way the friend has reacted to what you're saying, or things the friend has said to you personally that has made you feel that way? Now, for me, I think this is the easiest way to recognise it, just because for me personally, I'm quite aware of my emotions. I'm a very emotional person. Christian will tell you time and time again, I go from 0 to 100. Like, I can be absolutely fine and then I'll snap. I can be very happy. I can be very sad. I'm just an emotional being. I'm a Libra, if that means anything to anyone. So I really feel my emotions quite strongly and I'm very aware of them. So much so, like, even when I do snap at people, in my head, I know I'm snapping and I know it's irrational and I know it's not founded on anything. So I can feel my mind working differently to my emotions. So when I'm in a situation, I can really feel how that situation is making me feel and be able to label that, which I know not everyone is going to do. So although this may be my easiest one, it may not be for you, which is absolutely fine. It's just practicing. Like, for me personally, when I hang out with my friend Brooke, who I've mentioned many times on these podcast episodes, she is my best friend in the entire world. I've known her since I was 2. I'm now 23, so we've been friends for a very long time. But every time I hang out with her and I leave afterwards, I just feel great. I feel like a new lease of life. I feel upbeat and excited and just like I've had a really fun time, and I can quite easily sense that, like, physically in my being. Whereas when I hang out with someone who has been toxic to me in the past, I always feel a little bit like, oh, that was a bit shit, excuse my French, but just being honest, that's how I feel after leaving that. So if there is someone in your head who you're thinking, oh, actually, when I hang out with so and so, I do feel a bit crap afterwards, maybe next time you hang out with them, just pay a little bit more attention to that and see if you can either label the emotion you're feeling or the way you're feeling after you've hung out with them, or one step further, identify where that emotion is coming from and whether it is just you tend to talk about depressing things together and you just end up leaving feeling a bit sad, or whether it's from them personally through their actions, through their words, whatever it may be, whether it's them personally like, I want to say attacking, but that's a bit hard, but being like direct to you, implementing those emotions into you, if that makes sense. So the next way you can identify a toxic friendship is if they make your problems feel insignificant or ignored. Now, Healthline spoke about this in their definition, but I think it's quite easy to do, and I think this one's a little bit harder because something can be really big and personal to you and you can feel so bad about it, but someone else may not recognise it as such a big thing. Like, you may not have been able to find a matching pair of socks or something, and to you it's ruined your day, but to someone else it would be like not even a blip on their radar. Coming from me wearing odd socks right now, it may not even be a blip on their radar. So this one's a lot harder to figure out, but I think over time you'll realise this, like time and time again, if things are bothering you, or you're asking for help, or you just have something that's quite big going on in your life, or whatever it may be, and the person just keeps twisting it back around onto them and changing the subject, or just brushing your problems aside and diminishing the subject matter, whatever it may be, that can be really crap, and that's not what a friend is supposed to do. A friend is supposed to support you for the good and the bad, so either just listening to you, like being a soundboard, so not necessarily giving you advice or anything, but just being there, being open to listen to your problems, or taking it that one step further and being able to offer helpful advice if that's what you need. That's what a friend is supposed to do. They're not supposed to brush aside your problems, because your problems are as important as anyone else's. Problems are all contextual. You know, my problems may seem like nothing to you, or my problems may seem way bigger to you, depending on what your life looks like. So it's going to be different for everyone. But with friends, you're supposed to kind of know what each other are going through in your lives, so they should have the context of that, so not to diminish those. This next one gets me the most, I think, and it's when they aren't there when you need them. For me, this one, it's stirring something up inside me already. This one sucks the most, because for me personally, I see myself as a very reliable friend, like I said, and that basically means that when I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. And if my friend needs me through hell or high water, I'm going to get there some way or another. So when I have a friend, or I'm in a friendship with someone who says they're going to do something, or says that they're going to be there for me in a certain situation, and then bails, or just is unreachable, or just goes back on what they've said, that really hurts me, like deep down, because I just know if it was the other way around, that would never happen. And I think that's really important, that you're both friends are giving and taking as much as each other. You know, friendships are a two-way street. You can't have a friend just keep taking, and you just keep giving all of this stuff. And if you do need a friend to be there, you want to be able to count on them and to rely on them. And I think that's super, super important, especially if you have been there for them in the past, or just like made yourself super reliable to that person, made yourself super open and super supportive, and you're not getting the same back. That sucks the most. And it's really hard to be able to identify that as a toxic trait, because you love your friend, so you want to be able to make excuses for them. Time and time again, I've said like, oh, it's fine, you know, they're just busy, or their phone died, or they're far away, or something came up, they had to work. Like, I'll be the first person to make an excuse for my friend as to why they couldn't be there for me, because I love them and I want to give them the benefit of the doubt. But in reality, I should know my self-worth and know that actually I deserve better. You know, I shouldn't let people treat me like that, because I know what I provide to my friends, what I would give my friend, and I do expect the same in return, which I think is only fair, and that's how a friendship should work. So as difficult as it is to recognise that as a toxic trait, it can be really damaging and very, very toxic. So bear that in mind going ahead in your future friendships. Okay, so I'm going to combine the last two things that you can identify with toxic friendships, just because I kind of already mentioned them. So when you make all the effort and they just take, like I said, and also unfulfilled promises. So I've already mentioned those, but just, saying you're going to do one thing and not doing it, and then just being a bit of a hypocrite in the sense that they're expecting everything from you, but they're not willing to give anything to you. That can be really damaging and quite hurtful. So just bear those in mind. The hardest part of all of this is acknowledging you have a toxic friendship. Because sure, you can have identified some of the things I've just mentioned, but like I said, you can make excuses so quickly. You can choose to ignore them, and it's not necessarily like one thing flags up for the first time and you go, oh, that's a toxic friend right there, I've got to get rid of that. It's quite a hard thing and that takes a long time. It's a process to learn about this, to understand it, and then to acknowledge it to yourself is, to me, the biggest part, because you're admitting that something is wrong in your friendship. Like a relationship, I guess, like you're admitting there's a fault there and that you deserve better and that you're worth more. And that's a big thing for anyone, I think. So be patient with yourself. This may not come like immediately, but different ways you can acknowledge you have a toxic friendship are just to yourself. So in your head, maybe there's like a niggling feeling in the back of your mind, like, oh, I think that person could potentially be a toxic friend. You don't need to go out and air it straight away. You can kind of sit with it and decide what you want to do about it and weigh up like the pros and cons and how much it's affecting you and whether you think it's worth it or not. Just do that internally, because obviously you don't need to let everyone know your business straight away, especially if it's going to then affect their opinion of the person, or if it's going to stir up some drama that you don't necessarily need in your life right now. Because I know I don't. I will sit there personally just by myself and kind of figure it out. I think that's always like the first step. The other thing is other people may have identified it before you, and I think this happens a lot in relationships, maybe not so much friendships, because I feel like friendships are kind of separate. I know people hang out in groups and stuff, but in terms of like your parents and the people that care about you the most, they're kind of out of the loop with friends a little bit, depending on your friendship, obviously. But if other friends or your parents, or maybe even your boyfriend or girlfriend, whoever it is, may have said to you, like, oh, I think this friend isn't very nice to you, or oh, I don't think this friend treats you very well. Again, you can make excuses for that person and brush it aside and just ignore that person's opinion, because it's very easy to do if you're not willing to accept it yourself. But taking those little suggestions or opinions on board sometimes can also be really useful. Not necessarily saying like, oh, so-and-so said you're a toxic friend, so I'm not going to talk to you anymore, but maybe just listen a little more, like listen a little deeper, take it on board, and maybe just sit back the next time you hang out with that friend and see if that person's opinion has any weighting or is correct in any way, because perhaps it's not, perhaps they're jealous, perhaps they're blowing something out of proportion, you never know, but maybe they've seen something that you haven't identified yet. And again, it can be really hard to accept, but something to bear in mind again. So then obviously once you have come to that realization that maybe something in your friendship isn't sitting with you right, maybe that friend is very toxic and you've only just realized, whatever it may be, you then have to kind of figure out what you want to do and how to handle it. Now, this part sucks the most. I'll tell you right now, I really struggled with this for a very long time in terms of the friend that I had that I believed to be a toxic friendship. It took me a very long time to identify it. Again, I was just making excuse after excuse because I loved them and I loved having them in my life. And when it was good, it was really good. So why wouldn't I want that to keep that person around? But after a while, and after seeing how I get on with my other friends and how I value those friendships, as well as how I value myself and how others value me, it made me kind of realize, like, hang on a minute, why isn't this other person valuing me the same? Or why is this person willing to treat me this way if I don't treat them that way, and whatever? So this can kind of be a really tricky part to kind of figure out what you want to do. I mean, you can obviously rely on your other friends, ask them for advice if you're happy to make the situation public and get advice for that. It's absolutely fine, because maybe your other friends are going through the same thing or haven't realised it yet, or maybe they just love you unconditionally like friends do, and they'll have some good advice for you and can help you out in realising your self-worth and the actions you should take or the things you deserve, because sometimes it's easier coming from another person than necessarily telling ourselves. So I think the first way you can handle it is obviously to have the conversation with that person. So go to the toxic quote unquote friend and just have a conversation and say, like, this is how I feel when you do this, or when we're in this situation, sometimes you do this and it doesn't make me feel great. I just wanted to bring it to your attention because I don't want to be treated this way, so maybe we can do something next time so that I don't feel that way and we can go on to have a great friendship or whatever, to try and save the friendship. It needs to be spoken about. I'm a big fan of communication. If you couldn't tell, I have a podcast. I'm a big fan of communication, so my friends will tell you I'm very direct, so it's not necessarily like I'd sit down with that person and have a full-blown argument or anything like that, and like tiptoe around the subject or be sat there for hours. I'd quite happily just sit down, have like a cool, calm, level-headed conversation to be like, look, this is where I'm at. What can we do to fix it? I'm pretty practical in that sense, and I know not everyone's like that, so maybe you wouldn't necessarily feel brave enough to go up to that person, reveal your emotions and your feelings and come up with solutions for that. But in whatever way you would prefer to do it, whether it's over message or whether you want someone else there with you, but having that conversation, I think, is the only way you're going to save that friendship, if you want to save it. Obviously, if they are super toxic and you don't think it's worth it, you don't need to save that friendship. But sometimes if you feel like that person is a huge part of your life or super important to you, it sometimes feels worth having that conversation just to see if there is anything you can do. It can also always be like a bit of a trial run, doesn't have to be the be all and end all, but maybe just see where that goes. On the flip side of that, you can also just accept the loss and verbally end the friendship, which I personally haven't done, which I'll get into a bit later. But that is another option. Again, if you're just kind of settled in your decision, you've thought about the pros and cons, you've thought about how this person makes you feel, what you want to do about it, all of those things, you've aired it with a friend, and you've decided, no, you know what, I deserve better than this person is doing nothing for my life, I don't need them, they're just taking from me at this point, and I don't have the energy to entertain it anymore. Go ahead and cut that person out, and you can do that verbally to them and just be like, I really enjoyed our friendship for the past however long, but recently I felt XYZ and I don't appreciate feeling this way. I don't really want to be friends anymore. I'm sorry if this upsets you, but I'm doing this for me and I'd appreciate it if we didn't hang out anymore. Whatever wording you want to use, something along those lines, just to make it really obvious and kind of put a full stop at the end of that friendship, just for closure for you and the friend. Obviously they can get a better understanding of perhaps what went wrong, where they went wrong, and improve next time, or just they can learn something about themselves, as well as you have the closure of knowing like that friendship is done, that is a closed chapter in your life, and you have the ability and the freedom then to move on like guilt-free, knowing like you have that closure. The other thing you can do is phase out the friendship, which I think is maybe a little bit gentler or a little bit less obvious if you're not as direct of a person. You can just maybe hang out with them a bit less, say you're busy a bit more often. I don't know, maybe just choose to hang out with other people rather than them. Maybe text back a bit slower, reply to their calls a bit slower, don't like as many photos on Instagram, whatever it may be, just so that they start to get the feeling like you're pulling away a little bit. And then it can be quite a gradual process of just phasing that friend out, which may also make it easier for you. Obviously, if they were a huge part of your life, super important, you can kind of get used to the fact of not having them around as much and kind of start to figure out other ways to spend your time or other people to hang out with without like cutting it off cold turkey and then like missing that person or trying to get reconnected because you miss them so much. You can kind of phase it out, which makes it a bit easier for both parties, I guess, but it's obviously less direct, so you may not have like the same sense of closure, and they obviously won't know like what they did wrong necessarily. If they're not very self-aware, they may not have even known the habits that they were inflicting on you and all these damaging things, but it is definitely an option. The other thing you can do, which is kind of a bit shit, I guess, but also well within your right, I think, is to ghost them. So just don't hang out with them, don't message them, don't talk to them. Again, this is cutting it off cold turkey, obviously, but without the conversation to verbally end it, which I know some people may see as unfair because you just don't get the closure in any sense of the word. You know, you may feel fine about your decision, but the other person, like the toxic friend, may be left wondering why or feel hurt by your decision, which, if they're a really toxic friend and a bit crap of a person, they probably won't care, to be honest. Or they might miss the fact that they don't have someone to manipulate or someone to rely on, or like, I don't know, sponge off for the future, you know what I mean? But they won't necessarily feel like, oh no, maybe so-and-so's upset because of something I've done. I don't think that a toxic friend would have that thought process necessarily. So you don't have to feel that guilty, I guess. I don't know if this is making me sound really mean, but depending on the friend, obviously, depending on the situation and how crap of a human they've been, potentially you have the right to ghost them. So bear that in mind. Obviously, if they've done like one thing wrong and you've been friends for 5 years or whatever, ghosting them is a bit harsh, to be honest. And I think ghosting them is always like, nothing's ever final with ghosting, do you know what I mean? There's no full stop, so it's quite easy to like fall back into old habits or pick it up again, like just by accident or what have you, by like habit, like muscle memory. So I do think ghosting them is kind of like the weaker, quote unquote, way out, but also a way out for you not to be as direct if you don't feel comfortable doing that. That's definitely an option as well. In terms of my personal experience with toxic friends deciding what to do about toxic friends, I guess I'll give you the whole spiel. It's making me nervous that I'm gonna share all this on the internet because I never have before. I'll keep it very vague. I had a friend who I loved a lot. Like I said, I love my friends unconditionally. I feel like a very loyal, like encouraging friend, and I always kind of expect the same. And for so long, like, this friendship was great, like, we had the highest highs, so much fun, but it got to the point where I would message that person and they wouldn't reply, or I would message that person or ask them to hang out and they'd be like, yeah, I'll be there, and then they just wouldn't show, like, just stand me up, like, not message at all and just not be there. Or, I don't know, I just reach out and be very vulnerable and they would just kind of shoot me down. I didn't necessarily feel like they... do I feel like they diminished my problems? Maybe a little bit. The only thing that's coming to mind is when I message them saying like, I'm having a really crap time, I've just had a meltdown because I feel like I've had no friends, like I've literally been in tears. I don't know, it'd be really nice to whatever. I just like put out this really personal message about how I was feeling and how, you know, I felt a bit crap and everything. And they read it and didn't reply. And at that point, I think if you were a friend and your friend was crying because they felt alone and like you had abandoned them, you would send a message like, don't be silly, I love you so much, blah, blah, like, let's hang out next week, whatever it may be. But you definitely would not read it and then ignore it. And I think that was kind of the nail in the coffin for me that made me realise, like, whoa. In no sense of the situation, if it was the other way round, would I have done that? Because I found that pretty cutthroat, just to ignore that. And like I said, I had made so many excuses for this person, like in terms of like, they're busy, like I'm sure they'll reply later, they're at work. I had like done the full 9 yards with that, and I had just had enough. In that sense, like I just felt like I was giving so much energy to the friendship, trying to connect, trying to stay up to date, trying to meet up and all these things, and they were just never giving me anything back, which over time I have realised I'm usually the friend that reaches out first. I am usually the person to be like, oh, hey, do you want to hang out next week? Or like trying to organise something. And I don't know if that's just because I'm an event manager as the job. I like to be organised and have meetups and host and get-togethers and things, like it's part of my job description. So I don't know if that's just me as a person, like it's one of my characteristics of being a planner. But sometimes it's nice for people to ask to hang out with you, you know? So at that stage, I kind of recognised, okay, something's not right here. And I decided to have the conversation with that person just to try and save the friendship, because this friend had been such a big part of my life. I loved them so much. Like, they were just a huge part of my life. Like, the idea of not having them there, I couldn't handle that right then and there in the situation I was in. So I had that conversation with the person I met up. They showed up, luckily, and we had a really great conversation. And I was just like, you know what, this is what's been happening with me. This is what I kind of expect from the friendship, and I don't feel like I've been receiving that. They were very apologetic and so lovely, and were just like, oh, you know what, like, let's hang out more, let's do this, that, and X, Y, Z. And it just didn't work out. It was great again for like another couple of months, but slowly but surely, like, they fell back into old habits, and I was making excuses again and trying to organise meetups that would just fall through, and there's only so many times you can do that. So I tried cutting them out of my life, which was so difficult. It honestly felt like a breakup, which sounds very dramatic, but I didn't necessarily tell them that I was like cutting them out of my life. I just decided, like, I'm not going to entertain that person. If they want to message me, fine, but I'm not going to chase them to hang out. Like, I'm not going to make an effort to keep this friendship alive. If they want to keep it alive, if they want to keep this friendship together, I'm sure they will make that effort, and I'm happy to respond to that, but I'm not going to be the first person to do that. And it was really hard. I thought about them all the time, which sounds ridiculous, but I'd be like on the bus and I'd think, oh, I wonder what so-and-so's doing. I wonder if they're having a good time. I wonder how their family is. Literally as if we were boyfriend, girlfriend and we'd broken up, and I was like thinking about my ex. That is how it felt. It was very strange. And then I got into the headspace of like, it was almost, I was putting more energy into not messaging them than if I just messaged them. And I can't remember who messaged who first, but somehow they came back in my life. We had another great little, what was it called? Fling, I guess, of being great friends, being there for each other, messaging, hanging out. It was fab. But then again, old habits returned. And now I'm kind of in the mindset of, am I ghosting? Sure, maybe I'm ghosting. Maybe I'm back on the ghosting train. But if they ever message me or ask to hang out, I'm more than happy to do that. I think what I've realised is I was holding this person as very high up in my life, thinking like, oh, they need to be this kind of person because they're this kind of friend and they need to be doing X, Y, Z. Like, I had very high expectations of this person. So now in my mind, I've just dropped them down a few ranks to be like an acquaintance almost. Like, if I see them in the shop, I'm going to go up and say hi. If they contact me to hang out, if I see them on a night out, whatever it may be, I'll say hi. Like, I'm going to be cordial is the word, I think. And if they want to make a real effort or like reconnect, I'm happy to do that because it's not costing me anything personally. I'm kind of over that situation. Like, I don't feel bad in any sense of the word, but there is no way, shape or form that I'm going to make an effort with that person again to hang out, because I'm very lucky in a sense, I guess, that I've kind of realised that I'm worth more than that, and that I have people in my life that know that as well and that value me the same way I do. So I can have those friendships and relationships with people which are really great and so much fun, and I love them all so much and we have a great time. So I don't necessarily need this other person, which I think if you can be self-reliant and get to that stage, you obviously don't need anyone else other than yourself. And that takes a hell of a long time. So I'm not necessarily saying you guys are in that headspace, because I like to think I am, but who knows, honestly. And it's taken a hell of a lot of like self-help books and self-reflection and everything to get me to this point. So who knows if that would actually materialize into anything if I was in that situation. So I understand why it could be easier to cling on to an unhealthy relationship rather than be alone necessarily. But I'm lucky in the sense that I don't have to be alone, and I can cut that friendship off without feeling guilty or less than in any way, or that my life is lacking in some way because I haven't got that friendship in my life. The toxic friend doesn't necessarily know that I'm ghosting them or I'm not messaging them or anything, but I think we're both better off for it, because I'm not being persistent, nagging, or trying to cling on to something that they feel isn't there. Does that make sense? I really hope that makes sense. But that's kind of where I'm at with that whole situation, and it does feel a hell of a lot better. I just feel a bit lighter knowing like I haven't lost a friend, because they're still there, but they're a different kind of friend than they were originally. Like, they're lower down in the ranks. I have other people that I can rely on above them and hang out with above them. And yeah, that way I don't really feel like I've cut them out of my life necessarily, but there's not as much pressure on the friendship. I guess the last thing I'm going to kind of round off this conversation with, I guess, is some ways that you can like get over the friendship, which again sounds silly, but sometimes it really does feel like a breakup and you need these kind of techniques and distractions. So obviously, first one, rely on other friendships or relationships in your life. Now, like I said, I am lucky to have other people and other friends in my life which I can rely on. But whether that's your pet dog, your sister, your mum, your friend, your neighbour, whoever it may be, maybe it's a colleague at work, just try and put the importance that you put on the past toxic friendship on those relationships. So try to build those friendships, perhaps, if you don't already have some really solid friendships that you can rely on. Spend some more time with other people, message some other people, and just put that same energy that you put into that toxic friendship into other people and see what returns you get on that kind of thing. You can start to make some really great friendships that way and just really foster some great relationships with people you didn't necessarily think of straight away. And you can start to kind of understand what you should be expecting back, or how people respond to that kind of like great energy that you're putting into those relationships. And that way, again, you don't feel so lonely because you have other people to message and hang out with and chat to, and it's not like you're sat by yourself missing or dwelling on this past friendship. The other thing, obviously, is to distract yourself. So if you can talk to other people or hang out with them or work more, take on some more shifts, whatever it may be, just so that if that toxic friend does message you to hang out, you can say like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm busy, or oh, I have plans. Or if you would usually be sat at home and get bored and FaceTime them or message them or whatever, you don't necessarily have all the times on your hands to do that because you're off doing different things. For me personally, what I've done is I have muted them on social media, just because it's going to sound kind of petty, but when I would see images sound strange, pictures of that person like hanging out with other people, hanging out with people I knew, or hanging out with people they told me about, I would feel jealous, almost like I was almost watching like my ex with new people. It again sounds silly, hence the toxic friendship, how much pressure I put on this relationship, that I thought of them like a partner, I suppose. But I would get jealous, and then it would make me feel bad, and they would be able to have that same kind of effect on me without even saying anything or doing it to me directly. It was just something they were posting on their Instagram that I was like, you know what, I don't really need to be seeing that or being reminded of that. So I just muted them on social media, and it means that obviously they don't know that I've muted them, so I haven't caused any drama there, which I love the no drama of my life, so I don't want to cause any of that up in here. So just muting them is a really subtle way just to be able to ignore their posts and their stories. I've still got them on social media and everything, like they can message me, it's fine, but it just means I don't have like those unwelcomed prompts or reminder or know what that person is up to necessarily on the day-to-day, which I really like. And then obviously you always have the option to unmute that person when you have grown a little bit, gotten over it, whatever it may be, and you feel comfortable unmuting that person and having their content or their life back in your life. You're more than able to do that, which I really like. So that's just something I've done, and it's just given me a little bit of peace of mind and like one less thing to worry or stress about. With that, I think the last thing is to give yourself time to heal. Depending on the friendship, obviously, and how long you were friends and everything like that, the time is going to vary. So for me personally, I would say I'm over it, but I'm still not in the headspace to unmute that person. Like, I still have them muted, and I think it's going to be like that for a while, to be honest. But like I said, I've taken all the pressure off of the friendship, knowing my self-worth and knowing where I'm at and where that other person's at, or what that other person's habits are, knowing that I don't need that. So I'm more than happy to give it all the time in the world, if I'm honest. So I wouldn't necessarily put a timeline to it. Don't think like, oh, in 3 months I'll be able to unmute this person, or in 3 months I'll be able to walk past this person in a shop and not have to worry, or whatever it is. Just give yourself time to heal, and it's going to fluctuate. Obviously, some days you're going to completely forget about them and feel absolutely great. Some days you're going to dwell on it and feel bad and feel sad that they're not in your life, and maybe even tempted to reach out. I would say just do whatever feels right for you. But the most important thing, which obviously I can't tell you, but I can stress, is know your self-worth. Just put yourself in the other person's shoes. Like, if the roles were reversed and that person reached out to you or did what you have done in the past, would you treat them the way you have been treated? And if the answer is no, and you feel unfairly treated and that person has done you wrong, whatever it may be, remember those feelings. Remember how bad that made you feel, and know that you are worth more than that and that you deserve better than that. Because it's not okay. And to allow that kind of behaviour to continue is you accepting it. You may not be verbally accepting it, but passively you're accepting that behaviour as acceptable, and you're inviting others to treat you the same way that person is treating you, which just isn't right. Because me and you both know you're amazing and that you are worth more than that. And if you take anything away from this episode, I just want you to know that, because toxic friendships can be really difficult. They're sometimes easy to identify, but in terms of figuring out what you're going to do next, how you're going to handle that situation, it can be really difficult. So as lovely as your friend can be sometimes, and as much as you put pressure on that friendship, and as much as you want that friendship to work out, put yourself first, which I know doesn't necessarily always fit in friendships. You know, it's like a 50-50 two-way street in friendships. You're supposed to put each other first. But in toxic friendships, you really have to realise how you want to be treated and why you deserve to be treated that way, and put yourself in front of the other person to rectify that situation. So yeah, as you can tell, it's definitely a bit of a process. It takes a long time from identifying it to getting over it. It could take years, and there's no pressure to rush that process in any sense. And friendships are evolving things, so it's not necessarily going to always happen one way and that be it. It could fluctuate, and you could come back into each other's lives in ebbs and flows and dip in and out. And sometimes that's fine, and sometimes that works out for both parties. And as long as you're both comfortable with that and accept that, and again, take the pressure away from that friendship, or from it being the best friendship in your life, or whatever you're dreaming of it to be, then I think just be patient with it, because it's just a matter of time. As long as you're getting treated how you want to be treated by others and by your friends and by your friends' friends, then I think that's all happy days, and you can go on with your life being a happy, bubbly person that you deserve to be, knowing that you're being valued by your friends and you're loved in your relationships. But yeah, thank you so much for listening to this episode. It went so fast, and I think this is the first podcast episode where I've recorded it and I haven't necessarily been like watching the clock, being like, oh, I need to talk for longer, or maybe I can Google something else to like fill up the time, because this is just such an important matter to me and something I've experienced personally. I really wanted to share it with you guys. I maybe exposed a little more than I thought I was going to, so I hope you do keep an open mind with this episode. Be kind to me, and hopefully we can be kind to each other. I really do want to just like foster a community of people who care for each other, who have found a safe space to come and kind of talk about those things that don't necessarily make sense, even though everyone's telling you it should, or just those adult topics which you would assume you have figured out by your 20s, 25s, 30s, whatever you may be. And in all honesty, like, we're all trying to figure it out. Like, life isn't easy, life is a mess, and there are going to be question marks and dips and highs, and we're there for the full ride. So please listen along if you liked this episode. There'll be a new episode next Tuesday. If you have enjoyed this episode, you can also leave a review on Apple Podcasts, which would just let other people find the podcast. And I love reading your reviews so much, because they just make me so happy. Don't forget, you can obviously always DM me on To Be Candid Podcast on Instagram. I'm on there a lot, let's be honest. Everyone's on their phones a lot. I'm on Instagram a lot, so I will definitely get back to you if you have any questions about this episode, any questions about toxic friendships, or you just want to know a bit more about what goes on behind the scenes, or maybe you have a personal question for me, whatever it may be, go over to Instagram, let me know on there. I would love to speak to you all, but I will speak to you next Tuesday when I have a brand new episode for you all. So hopefully speak to you soon. Bye.